This is January 3rd, 2025. We're in DeLand House. We're interviewing Nicki Junkins. My name is Kathy Hirsch, and we're very pleased that you're here with us this morning. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here, Kathy.
I'd like to touch on your early life, and if you could just tell us a bit about where you grew up and your education.
Sure. Well, I was born in southern New Hampshire, a small town called Milford, New Hampshire. I was raised as an only child. It was a small town. It was a wonderful community where everybody knew each other. You know, I could walk to school. I had friends in the neighborhood that I played with. And that's where I got my K through 12 education. After I graduated from high school, I went on to Syracuse University. I was a pre-med student. And after a while, I thought, you know, I've been in school a long time. I've been a good student. I think I'm ready for a change. So I gave up that scholarship and I quit college, much to my father's surprise. And I went to work and decided that, you know, I would go back to school eventually. Met my husband. We got married, had a son, and then I went back to school and got a degree in chemistry. And was planning to go into medical research or pharmacy, one or the other. But at that point, my children were small. I had two boys. They were quite young. The youngest was not in school yet. And I thought, well, medical research is very demanding, so I'll hold off on that. And I took a job at a local high school. And I was the physics and I was the advanced math teacher, and found, well, I like this. This will be good for a few years. And it was at that point that we decided to move to Florida. And of course, when I came to Florida, it was because my husband's work. He was in construction. He was a project manager. And I'll never forget the night that he didn't get home until 10:30 at night. He had left in the morning.
This is back in New Hampshire.
Back in New Hampshire. And he had left in the morning. It was a fine day in January, and about midday it started to have a blizzard. And it took him hours and hours to get home from his project in Boston. And he walked in the door, and the first thing he said to me is, I will never go through another winter in New England again. And it was at that point that we decided to move to Florida. Well, when we got to Florida, the opportunities to go into medical research and to go to pharmacy school was really non-existent at that point.
For women?
For women, and had some experiences here that, you know, kind of just convinced me that there wasn't a lot of opportunity for women at the time. I had found a job for a chemist right here in town. It was called Sherwood Medical, right out towards Deltona. And I had gone over with my degree in hand and my resume, and I had approached the secretary. And I told her why I was there and that I was interested in applying for the job. And her first question to me was, do you type? Well, I paused and I thought, well, I took personal typing in high school, but I wasn't aware that typing was a requirement for the chemist job. And she says, oh, no, it's not, but we don't hire women for those jobs. And I realized that I was going to have difficulty. And that was the same in New Hampshire. I had faced the same discrimination in terms of being a woman, particularly in the sciences. And that's when I applied for a job at DeLand High School. And I applied for a math job. I had taught math and successfully in New Hampshire and had the credentials, interviewed and thought it went great until I was told at the end of the interview that they weren't quite ready for a woman from the Northeast with a degree in chemistry. Weren't quite sure, you know, what I would bring to the table. So I didn't get that job. So I continued to substitute teach, and there was another job opportunity that came available at the school. This time it was for a higher level of mathematics. And
this is still at DeLand High.
This is still at DeLand High. And I applied for the job, and again, went in, thought it went very well, but I didn't hear anything. And I thought, well, that's odd. So finally, I was called back and I was given the job. Well, I later found out that in the interim, they had decided that instead of hiring me, they were going to hire a soccer coach without the credentials necessary to teach higher level math, so they were going to change the teaching assignment. And what I didn't know is I had two advocates, both males. One was the physics teacher, Raleigh Desert, who was also the president of the teachers union. And the other was the school math department chair, Bob Hughes. And I had substituted for his calculus classes many times. So they knew I was able to teach higher level courses. And evidently they had gone in and spoken to the principal and said, if you go ahead with your plan, we're going to write a letter to the newspaper explaining that academic excellence is not important at DeLand High School. So again, it was the fact that I was a woman. On the other hand, it was two men that interceded for me and did open the door. And that really began my career in education here. I continued for almost 30 years. And during that time, I also got a master's degree at Stetson and a doctorate at the University of Central Florida, all in education and mathematics.
You were in a supervisory capacity, I understand, when the Sunshine State Standards came in and the FCAT, if you could explain FCAT and what impact that had.
Well, after I taught at DeLand High, I went down to Deltona High and opened up that as a brand new high school math department chair. There was an opening for the math supervisor's position at the county level, and I took that position. And they were just starting to move into standards-based curriculum, which was really a major move in education because it went from basic skills to higher order levels of reading, critical thinking, problem solving, and mathematics. So it was a positive move in that regard. Well, as those standards were being implemented, they were also bringing online the FCAT, which was an accountability test that was going to monitor student progress and school achievement in math and reading. And the superintendent, Bill Hall, recognized that we really needed to upgrade our curriculum and our teaching standards so that we would be ready for the test. So I was asked to assume the role as director of curriculum, but I also took accountability underneath my umbrella, so I held both roles. And the thought was that we did not want to teach to the test. We really wanted teachers to concentrate on good teaching every day, so that when I spoke with principals and teachers, it was as director of curriculum, but I was really also showing them what needed to happen in the classroom for students to be successful on the accountability test without making it a teaching to the test environment. And we were very successful in the beginning. It went very well. It was a major shift for educators, going from that basic skills kinds of drill and kill to actually more robust teaching that would teach kids to think critically and read at higher levels. And in the beginning, I think it had some very positive impacts on instruction. From my own perspective, as I watched it, the accountability, I think, overtook the focus on the curriculum and on the teaching. And so as the accountability got more and more punitive in terms of assigning grades, it also was monetized. Schools got money for high grades, teachers got money for high grades. I think that perhaps the shift has happened from going from what's happening instructionally to making sure students do well on the test. So I think I've seen a shift from no accountability to maybe excessive accountability over those years.
And what impact do you think that that's had on what students learn?
I think it really ties, from my personal perspective, I think it ties teachers' hands from being creative, for going in depth into things and to kind of tying into student interest. I think it's so geared to what's on the test that we've really shifted from teaching for the love of teaching and learning to more performing on a test.
Mm-hmm. Were your own children impacted by that?
Not so much. My own children did not go through the FCAT years. When my children were in school, they had the I guess you'd call basic skills CTBS testing. They also had the high school graduation test, the HSCT at that time, but it was a basic skills test. And so certainly we wanted to make sure they were prepared for that, but neither students nor teachers were under the same pressure that they are today.
And what are the names of your children?
My oldest son is Chris, and my youngest son is named Jason. They both live in DeLand, both on West University Avenue. And DeLand is home for them. My younger son is in the military right now. He's stationed in Washington, D.C., but he calls DeLand home. And they have wonderful memories of growing up in DeLand. And when we're together, we'll reminisce about many of those memories.
And what are some of their favorite things that they mention frequently?
Well, you know, DeLand was a wonderful little town. It had so much going on. When we moved here, you know, it was still a very small town. And they would leave in the morning on their skateboards or their bicycles, and I wouldn't worry about it, you know, and they would be gone for much of the day. They would talk about going over to the river and fishing. They would actually, I didn't know this, jump into the river at that time with the snakes and alligators and tell stories about that. I didn't know what was happening. They also had a lot of opportunity in terms of sports. They played soccer, and there were summer camps available. They loved school. They played football, the football team. And so I think it was just a very good environment for them to grow up in. When we moved here, my husband had bought a house intentionally very close to the school they went to, Woodward Avenue Elementary School. And they could walk out the door in 5 minutes, walk up the street, and they would be at the newest and only air-conditioned school at the time when we came in the 70s. And of course met friends, and they would always bring them home. We had a big backyard, and we had a pool, and they would play football and soccer, and it was just a great environment for kids.
Sounds idyllic.
It was.
Tell us the story about how your husband bought the house.
Well, after he decided he didn't want to spend another winter in New England, he came to Orlando to look for a job. And he got one very quickly. There was a lot of construction work, and so he got a job as a project manager. But Orlando was growing so rapidly, he knew we didn't want to live there. So on a lark, he took a ride up to DeLand. His uncle had owned orange groves here and had spoken fondly of the town, so he thought he would just check it out. So he happened to stop by a local real estate office just to see what might be on the market. Well, he brought him to the house on South Woodward Avenue. That was for sale, and it was a private sale. And the owner wanted to hold the mortgage, and Bob looked at the house and the yard, and it was perfect for us. And he decided that, you know, he didn't want to take a chance of it not being available. So there were no cell phones at the time, so he didn't have a chance to call me. He put a down payment and signed a contract to buy the house. So he called me that night and told me all about this wonderful little community, and he knew I would love it. And oh, by the way, I bought a house. Well, there was this very long pause at the end of the line, and he said, "But honey, it has a pool and a dishwasher. You're gonna love it." And I trusted his judgment, and sure enough, it was a great place to raise our children.
You mentioned that this house, the DeLand House, owned by the Historical Society, was very reminiscent of the house you grew up in.
Absolutely. I grew up in a Civil War era community, so many of the homes up there are very similar to this one. The home that I grew up in was built before the turn of the century, probably right about the time. It was a wood frame home. I was brought home from the hospital in that house. The interesting story about that is my father's family, who had come from Sicily, had bought the homestead next door. And that's where my father grew up. And his father had bought this particular property that I grew up in as a rental property. So when my father married my mother, his father said, "Well, why don't you rent the house next door?" So my father literally moved his belongings from his family's home next door and lived there all his life, and that's where I was raised. And so throughout the time that I was growing up, my parents did a lot of improvements to the house, a lot of renovation work, a lot of restoration work. So when I had the opportunity to work on this house, it was a little bit of nostalgia. My husband also grew up in Amherst, New Hampshire, which adjoined my town of Milford, and that's on the historic register. A lot of 1700s homes. He lived in one. Pre-Civil War. And when he was in New Hampshire, in his business, he did a lot of historic restoration. So that while I'm not the preservationist he was, I worked right along with him. And so coming to this house and doing that work kind of just synced with the things that we did when we were in New Hampshire.
Tell us how you came to become involved.
Well, I became involved quite by accident. I had wanted to get involved with the Historical Society. A friend of mine, Betty Johnson, who was a trustee, I'd mentioned it to her, and she said, "Oh, you'll love that. You need to get involved." But I had held off. I had been involved in a play at the Athens Theater, and I met my friend Deb McShane there. And Deb, of course, was the director of the play and the writer of the play, but she was also the president of the Historical Society at the time. And she said, "You know, you ought to get involved in the Historical Society." I said, "Yeah, that's something I think I'm interested in." So a couple of weeks went by after the play was over, and she called and said, "Why don't we go to coffee?" So we went for coffee, and that's where she proposed the idea that I join the renovation team. I didn't even know it was being renovated. Why don't I join this? I was a member of the society, but why don't I join the renovation team and work with Mary Lou Peffer, who was at that time coordinating the renovation in doing this project? Well, I knew Mary Lou and really thought a lot of Mary Lou, and I thought, well, let me find out about this. So I attended a couple of the meetings with the team. And it was a tremendous team of people that were very dedicated, knowledgeable, and I could tell this was a project I wanted to be involved in. And so that's how I got involved. And it's been one of the most enjoyable, meaningful projects I've ever done.
What were some of the challenges you faced?
Well, the fact that it's a 150-year-old home, things never go as planned. So we had to wait for a long time to even begin the process. The city owns the building, and they had to put on a roof, they had to level the floor, and so we couldn't even get in. But what we decided is we had to have all the plans in place. So we got all of the plans in place, and of course when you get in, sometimes best laid plans don't always go as you think they're going to. And a couple of those were the fact that we had planned to use the flooring in the kitchen. And when we explored that, Mark Shuttleworth, who is a restoration expert, came in and said, "You're not going to be able to sand this floor. It's been sanded once and it's much too thin." So all of a sudden, we had to come up with another plan. And of course, cost was involved, period was involved, and after hours and hours of searching, we finally were able to find appropriate flooring from a company in England. Then we would go through and we would working with Poppy Flack, the interior designer, and we would identify beautiful wallpaper. And then we would go to order it, finding it was no longer in print because these wallpapers were not being used, not sold in those numbers. And so it was things like that there were always one thing after another. At one point we had some kind of a suspicious growth in the bedroom. And the city came in and tried to treat it, and we had no idea what it was. Well, fortunately, once the roof went on, the problem cleared up. And then we were able to proceed with that. But it was, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but we persevered, and here it is.
Very proud of it.
We are proud of it. And we were delighted to offer it to the community. I think it really is reflective of it tells the story of not only the family that lived here, but the city of DeLand in a very exciting period in that time as we're going into the 1920s. So it really is a reflection of the whole community and what makes us the special place that DeLand is today.
You have seen some changes in DeLand.
I have.
Describe DeLand when you first came and the changes you saw happen?
Well, you know, what drew us to DeLand was very similar downtown to what we grew up in New Hampshire, that kind of central downtown with all the merchants. When we first came, there was a mix of chain stores and mom and pops. We had J.C. Penney's right down on the corner of Woodland Boulevard and New York Avenue, and right on opposite sides of the street, we had a McCrory's and a Woolworth's. Both of those had little lunch counters. My boys absolutely loved at Christmas time to come down, and one of our traditions would be that we'd come down with their Christmas money, and we'd always have lunch at one of the lunch counters. They loved the hot dogs and the hamburgers and the French fries, and then they would spend their money, you know, looking at all the wares. It also had some tremendous mom and pops. We had Gus Gibbs' store, Betty Drika's. Betty was still running it at the time that we moved here, and that was, of course, a family that ran a mercantile for 100 years in this community.
That was the Drika department store?
Well, there was originally the Drika Mercantile and Department Store, and after they sold that, Betty's father opened Betty Drika's Fine Women's Apparel. And it was named after Betty, and she later took that on as a project. And I had great fun of actually reenacting Betty Drika in our recent cemetery walk a year ago. And so was just kind of enamored of her. She was a very interesting person in our history. There was also the Tedford's Jewelry Store. There was a wonderful little gift shop. The Athens Theater at the time was a movie theater. It wasn't a performance theater. It was not the beautiful theater it is today. I remember taking our boys to see Indiana Jones, the first Indiana Jones there. It also had some great restaurants. It had mom and pops, the Hunters. We had Bellini's, Mano's. We had a great pizza shop that we loved, Marino's, which is still in existence today, run by the same family over on 15A. There was local theater. We had the Stover, and they had the Shoestring Theater, was a local group in DeLand at the time. I think it's since moved. And it was just a very robust, vibrant downtown community. Well, after the chains left, McCrory's, Woolworth's, J.C. Penney's went out, you started getting the big box stores coming in. Now, DeLand protected its downtown. You couldn't come and build the stores downtown, but you got them on the peripheries. But I think we were very lucky in that Main Street came in when it did and protected the downtown and made sure that those local shop owners were protected and had the support they needed. And I think it's made us the community that we are today.
They're still working at that too.
They are still working at that, and I think it's important that we keep our eye on it to keep the community the lovely downtown that we are. And I think the DeLand House adds to that. You know, it's one of the things you can do if you're coming to DeLand for the day.
And of course, the city has won awards, national awards.
Absolutely. You know, the other thing I think I've seen is a little bit of openness to outsiders. When I first came, I came from New England. I was a northerner. My husband was a northerner. Bob had kind of a bigger personality than life, and you could hear that New England accent, you know. And there were some folks, not all, but particularly older folks that I won't say were not negative towards us, but they were a little hesitant. They weren't quite sure. I was not accustomed to being called a Yankee carpetbagger. I think there was a hesitancy of what are these Northerners going to do to our little town of DeLand. And so there was a little bit of resistance because DeLand hadn't really started to grow when we first came. Orlando had. So we were in that first wave of folks coming from outside. And of course now it's hard to find somebody that was native to the area. But we were that initial wave that came in, and there was a little bit of hesitancy until they got to know us and we got to know them. And so now I think it's much more welcoming, and you don't even think about that today.
One of the things that's interesting to me particularly is the original founding philosophy, which I'm wondering what your perspective is on that. Do you think that people are still very much aware of that as a legacy?
I think that there are those that are. I think that the folks that are involved, certainly in the Historical Society and some of the downtown Main Street are. I don't think the community as a whole is. And I think that's part of the job of the Historical Society, is to make them aware of that, because we have a very rich history, and it's a fascinating story. And I think a lot of people move here and don't realize that DeLand has a history and a background. A lot of people think Florida doesn't have much history. And of course, the whole story of Stetson and the story of how DeLand was founded is unique and very special. So I think more work is needed on getting that story out so that we value our heritage. And I think at the same time, the Black community has a story of its own that it's trying to tell. And integrating that into the mix, I think, is also important.
Do you see that as something that is a future emphasis, or that is a project maybe?
I think getting the word out about DeLand's history needs to be a focus of the Historical Society. I think that's what these things are about. It's what the DeLand House is about. The Historical Society offers our monthly topics on local history, and I think trying to get word out so people are aware of it and they come and learn more about it is something we need to do better at in terms of outreach.
In mentioning the Black community, you mentioned earlier that when you first came, there was evidence of Klan.
There was. Now, I will say that my boys were in school at the time. It was fully integrated. I taught at the high school. It was fully integrated. So I didn't see it in that venue. I just saw a little bit of vestiges of it. I remember my boys bringing friends home that they would make at school, and Black children, whoever. I mean, they were their friends, and a couple of my older neighbors raising an eyebrow that there were black children in the backyard, and I just explained, yeah, they're my boys' friends, and it never went beyond that. I think when you had the DeLand Christmas parade, which is always so special, you saw a mix. At the north end, you would have the white community watching the parade. At the south end, you would have the Black community. So it wasn't fully integrated at all. I think it was I don't know, none of that was legal. I mean, it wasn't for legal reasons. It was just that opportunity to mix. I think it started in the high school. They were mixed. I never saw any problems at the high school. My boys played on sporting teams, and there was a mix of students. But I think there was that initial divide. And I did see it particularly, some of our older folks who had lived in the community for a long time, not quite sure when we were bringing those children into our home why we were doing that.
What's your perception now? Do you think it's still segregated?
Not to the degree it was. I think we still have a lot of work to do. Having the communities interact with one another. I think Main Street is making an effort to do that, and to do that. I think there are many more opportunities for folks to get to know one another than there used to be. I still think there's work to do.
Let's talk about your tenure as president of the Volusia County chapter of the League of Women Voters.
Well, yes. After I retired and failed at it 3 times. And the reason I failed at it was I had been so used to being very, very busy and getting up in the morning and have something to do that once I retired, I hadn't built that into my plan. And a friend of mine, Pat Drago, was very involved in the League, and she and I would meet for lunch with friends, and she'd talk about what the League was doing, and I thought, oh, gee, I'm interested in that. And I always wanted to give back to my community after I retired because I was so busy with my children, my career, my education, that I hadn't really had time to do that. I I'm not a highly political person. I don't get into that realm, and I was drawn to the League because of its nonpartisan nature, and that it was highly involved in educating the public, and I'm an educator. And I believe in civic responsibility, and making sure that people are voting and they understand what they're voting for. And I also like many of the issues that the League was involved in. So I very shortly after I joined, I was asked to be the treasurer. And I guess because they knew I knew how to do spreadsheets, and I was a math person so I could count, I guess that that qualified me. So I was the treasurer for a couple of years, and then they asked me to become president. And it's been, I'm on my 6th year as president. I will be stepping down at the end of this year, but I have seen such a huge change in the political dynamic, not only in Florida but in the country. And negotiating that in a nonpartisan way has been challenging, but I think it's really important. We have to be able to talk to one another, even if we have differences of opinion. And I think one of the roles of the League is to make sure that people have accurate information and that we can have that dialogue civilly and respectfully.
That's one of the things I hear people complaining about a lot now is where do you go to for that accurate information?
That's right.
Whom can you trust with real facts?
Well, and that's a voice that the League has been in existence for almost 105 years. We have always been nonpartisan. Our mission is to make sure that people not only are registered to vote, but they have accurate and updated information. And that is the central focus of our work, and that's what drew me to it. And we live in an age of mis and disinformation. It's very serious. It undermines, I think, our democracy. And so we've done a lot of work through our Speakers Bureau, through our social media, any mechanism that we can to be available to the public for accurate information, not only on elections, but issues of the day. And I've enjoyed that work.
What do you see as your legacy? Have you thought about that?
That's a really interesting question, Kathy. I want my legacy to be one of contribution and service, and trying to better the community through love and peace, I guess, and education.
And what advice would you give to a young mother struggling to find that balance in life between job and home and...
Focus on what's really important, your family, your children, and take time to reflect on yourself. Take care of yourself too, I think. You have to have some downtime to really think about where you are and where you're going, and prioritize. And sometimes you just have to learn to say no to the things that aren't important and make time for the things that are most important. I know when I was going through my career, my education and my family, my family was first. My husband supported me in my education, but I deferred doing a lot of the things, joining clubs and groups in the community so that I could focus on my family and my career, but then knew that once I got to that point, then I would have time for that. And that's how I balanced it. I think everybody has to find their own balance.
Oh, what do you look forward to now?
Well, I look forward to continuing my volunteer work. I love to do that. My son and I just bought a summer home right up on the Canadian border in Vermont. It's 600 feet on the Connecticut River. And, a little bit going back in the summer, I'm looking forward to that, thinking maybe there's a historical society up there that might need a house that needs renovating. You never know. But I just look forward to, continued my work here. I'll continue to work with the League. I love to travel, and I still have some bucket list trips that I want to take. So take advantage and live my life as best I can. I guess I embrace adventure. I embrace learning new things, meeting new people. My husband and I came together, as a team with our children, and I never really thought about the fact that I was leaving the North to come to the South. Now, it hit me when I got here that there was still that mental divide with some folks, but it didn't interfere with our life. Once we got to know those people, they were fine with us. Those few people that were hesitant, it was a little different, but I don't remember it being an obstacle or of a concern to me.
What do you think is the biggest challenge or problems facing the school district today?
Oh gosh, that's an interesting question. I think right now there is this effort to privatize education, and doing so in such a way that many times school districts are being underfunded, they're being undervalued. I think in some ways the accountability system is so stringent, it's discouraging to teachers, and finding teachers to go into that system and willing to devote their lives is an issue. I think right now public education is in a transition stage, and I think we're not quite sure what we want from our public school educators. I think we want them to be everything to everybody, and perhaps we need to focus in on what it is we really want public schools to be, because there are a lot of societal pressures, and schools can't solve every single problem.
That seems to be a trend that I've been aware of what exactly you're saying, that the teacher is supposed to do everything.
They are.
From teaching critical thinking to wiping noses to they've even been asked to learn how to carry a weapon.
Right.
That has been suggested anyway. Mm-hmm. So what advice would you give to young people thinking about going into education and who might be discouraged by a lot of this?
Well, we need good educators. I believe public education has been the institution that's opened the door to the American dream for all children. So I think education is still an important career path. I think you have to go into it because you really care about children, but also know that there are a lot of rewards. I still have students coming to my door or emailing me and letting me know the difference I made in my life. And I also think there is a career path within education, that once getting teaching under your belt, we need good administrators, we need good curriculum developers, so that you can look at it as a career path that has great rewards and great possibilities. Knowing that I don't think any career today is perfect. This one certainly has its challenges, but there are a lot of personal benefits to it that you get in the long term. And I'm glad I stayed in education as long as I did.
It's almost immeasurable, the impact, isn't
it? It is. It truly is. When you have that student come back and say, "You're the reason I'm doing what I'm doing today," And I see that in my students today. They're still my kids.